This is the video on solving quadratic equations algebraically. Quadratic equations are equations with the term x squared in it. X squared is the term with the highest exponent on a variable. And there are four ways that we're going to learn on how to solve quadratic equations. Okay? As you can see here, we have factoring, extracting square roots, completing the square, and quadratic formula. We're going to do an example of each, and so be sure you're taking notes. Pause when you need to, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, first we're going to look at factoring. Okay, this is probably the most recognizable one. So here's an example. Solve 6x squared minus 11x equals 10. Now, in order to factor a quadratic equation, we want to make sure that everything is on one side. So here, we move the 10 on the other side. Then, hopefully, your factoring skills are pretty good from Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, because this easily factors into 2x minus 5 and 3x plus 2. If you need help with factoring, come see me and I can give you some practice problems and some tips on how to factor easier. Okay, whenever you have two things multiplied by each other like this, if either one of them equals 0, then the whole thing becomes 0, because anything times 0 is 0. This is called the zero product property, or the zero factor property. So you kind of break them off into two parts like this, and so this becomes x equals 5/2, and this side becomes x equals negative 2/3, and those are your answers. So that's factoring. Okay, now let me erase this. Okay, this is taking a long time to erase. Let's see, excuse me. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. The second way to solve quadratic equations is called extracting square roots. Now this one is probably the easiest way, but you have to know when to use it. So here's an example. Here, on this side, we have 3 minus 2x quantity squared. And some people might be tempted to multiply that out. But the smart thing here to do would just be to square root both sides. So if I square root both sides, it would look like that. Okay? And so the right-hand side, as you know, becomes 3 minus 2x, because square rooting something squared leaves you with that something. But on the other side, whenever you square root both sides, you have to remember that it becomes positive or negative 4. 4 squared is 16. Negative 4, quantity squared, is also 16. Then this breaks into two parts. 3 minus 2x equals 4. Or you can have 3 minus 2x equals negative 4. You solve those, and you end up with x equals negative 1/2, or x equals 7/2, and those are your answers. Okay, so extracting square roots works really nice when you have it in a form that you can square root both sides easily. Okay, next one. Okay, the third method is probably the one that gives people most trouble, and that is completing the square. So here's an example. 2x squared minus 20x plus 32 equals 0. The first step to completing the square is that you have to move everything that does not have a variable with it to the other side. So here I'm moving 32 on the other side. Then the second step is I have to factor out a 2 from both the quadratic term and the linear term. And so I have this. Then the next step is to complete the square. And this is the part where you have to figure out what goes over here so that this whole parentheses can be written as a binomial squared. And so you might remember that we have to take half of the 10 here, which is 5, and square it, and you get 25. So you add 25 right there, which means that you're going to need to add 25 on the other side, but that 25 gets multiplied by 2, and so you're really adding 50 on the other side because you introduced a 50 on the left side that wasn't there before. So what you have now is 2 parentheses x minus 5 squared equals negative 32 plus 50 gives you 18. Okay? Then you move the 2 on the other side and you have x minus 5 squared equals 9. And guess what? You now have it in a form where you can do the previous method that we just did, extracting square roots. So you square root both sides and you have x minus 5 equals plus or minus 3. So x is going to be 8 or 2. So again, pause, rewind if you need to see some of those steps again, because we're moving on now to method number 4. Method number 4 is the quadratic formula. This one, I'm hoping that you guys are not going to have a hard time in as much. So number 4, we're going to do the same problem that we just did. 2x squared minus 20x plus 32 equals 0. And we're going to do the quadratic formula. Now before we do it, it's a smart idea to factor out a 2 so that we're dealing with smaller numbers. Okay? Keep in mind that in the form ax squared plus 2x plus c equals 0, the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? Now, despite what song you have learned in the past to memorize the quadratic formula, the correct song to sing is Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And so try it. I'll show you in class tomorrow. Okay, now I'm going to delete this so that I have some room to work on this. Alright, so x, oops, sorry, let me rewrite the problem. X squared minus 20x plus 32 equals 0. Sorry for the shaking. Okay, 2. Alright, here we go. So x equals negative 10 plus or minus root b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times 1. So this becomes 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 minus 64, which is 36 all over 2. So you have 10 plus or minus 6 over 2, which gives you 8 or 2. Same answers as the other time. Now notice that I have negative 10 in parentheses, and I have the parentheses in pink to emphasize that you need those parentheses there. If the parentheses, and let me point out where I'm talking about right there, if the parentheses are not there, it will be considered wrong because negative 10 parentheses squared and negative 10 squared without the parentheses give you different numbers. So make sure that you're very careful. Okay, and so that's solving quadratic equations algebraically using 4 different methods. Feel free to rewind and rewatch some of the video if you need a review on how to do some of these. Tomorrow in class, Tuesday in class, we're going to be doing a lot of problems that use those 4 methods. So I hope you're ready. Make sure you took notes. That's part of the assignment of watching these video lessons. See you all in class.